looking at these cells that are constituents of our body, to the point where we look at what's happening inside the cells, what is happening on the cellular level, to have all of these things function together perfectly. And as we mentioned before, we have tens of trillions of cells in our body, tens of trillions of cells. That means that just in the little point of my finger right here, I have more than 1 billion cells. And all of those cells need to be able to coordinate their activities and work together in order to be able to form a living organism. And imagine the amount of cooperation that we must have between ourselves. How about just the type of coordination that is needed for one heartbeat? In our heart, we have billions of cells, and all of these cells are connected together. We have two places in our heart, one on the very top where the signal comes in and starts the contraction of the aorta, and then another signal which goes and starts the contraction of the ventricles. And the coordination of those battling mechanisms needs to be perfect in order to be able to force the blood from our lungs and the rest of our body through the rest of our body. Imagine the signaling process that have to take place among billions of cells in order for such coordination to take place. And it all has to do then with cell signaling. In our brains, we have billions again of neurons. And each neuron is connected with the other neurons in our brains through these little synapses. And the signaling processes that take place between the cells in our brains actually give us the ability to reason, our cognitive ability, the ability to be able to have all the functionality of our brains, our memories, our past experiences, our emotions, the ability to recognize patterns, and to associate these patterns with things that may be dangerous or things that may be familiar to us. And all of these things are happening inside of our brains by cellular communication. If I were to raise my hand, the signaling inside my brain, which on an atomic level could be on the other side of the universe almost, from the muscles inside of my arm. The signaling processes on the atoms in my brain are actually causing these signals to go through these tissues to target specific muscles in my arm, and therefore I have control over my body. So that's also a signaling system. And then all of these signaling systems throughout the whole body need to be coordinated through our cells. Each cell then, as we have said, allows signals to come in. Some are hormones that are coming into our cells on a daily basis. Some are electrical signals. I like to think of each cell as being somewhat like a house in a community. And the hormones that come in are like the mailboxes. They're the mail. And the streets of the house are like the blood vessels that carry the supplies and everything that's needed between cells. And then the electrical signaling processes also happen between neuronal material, neurons, or conductive material that's between all of our cells. And so what we find is the same as our brain cells are all connected together and signaling, every cell in our body is also connected together and signaling. And the processes that keep these signals then working and viable are extremely important in our cells to maintain the integrity of our whole body. In fact, we almost might say that we are the product of signaling cells. That's what makes us alive. That's what gives us life. If there was no signaling between our cells, we would be, in effect, dead or unable to do it. So these signaling processes are very extremely important. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit now about genes, since I am going to go into, in a little bit of depth, the study that took place. It's taken over 2 years in the Tourette laboratories in Salt Lake City, Utah, about how these redox signaling molecules then affect our genes, and which genes then are affected by these redox signaling molecules, and what the significance of that could be to the signaling processes that happen in our body. And before I go into the genetic results or the genetic things, I wanted to explain to you a little bit about why and how our genes work. You might think that our genes are the things that give us our eye color, that give us our skin tone, our facial structure, our bone structure, the things that give us our physical characteristics. That is very true, but that is only a very small part of what the genes do. Inside our bodies, the genes every second, every millisecond, millions of times a second, are being expressed. What do I mean by an expression of a gene? Think of our little cells then as little tiny micro machines, as tiny little computers. Or you might want to think of them as cell phones, because we know we have smartphones, and we can hold them in our hands. And these smartphones that we have applications. So if we wanted to dial a number, for example, I push that little button that has a phone on the screen of my smartphone, and it pulls up a dialer and then allows me to make a phone call. Every single cell has these applications written inside our genes. There's some 30,000 genes in every cell, give or take. And these 30,000 genes then are activated in order to carry on the processes of life inside our cells by the signaling messengers that happen to come by. And then there's a really good question. Now, what actually activates our genes? You might want to think of the thing that activates our genes as a huge, our genes as a huge panel of buttons, let's say. And each button then can activate a certain gene and activate a certain protein inside of our body, or the production of a certain protein. And so the question that I asked is, who is pressing these genetic buttons that keeps our genes active? And the answer is actually very interesting. Almost everything presses these genetic buttons. For example, if we have a happy thought, our happy thoughts can actually express genes which make hormones like serotonin inside of our brains, and the serotonin and such is a hormone that gives us this feeling of elation, of feeling good. And just a happy thought, for example, expresses these genes and expresses the hormones inside of our system. The genes are necessary, those genetic buttons are necessary to produce the hormones that are used to control our moods. So moods can affect genes. What we drink can affect our genes. If I drink some orange juice, for example, and the components of the orange juice, the acidity and such of the orange juice goes inside my stomach and is digested, well, that affects my genes too. So the question is, almost everything affects my genes. The question is then how does the body know which of these genetic buttons to push? Stem cell technology is also growing very big. stem cells are cells that do not have an operator that presses specific genes to make the cell operate as a heart cell or a brain cell. But these can be, just a second, I'm going to mute. I'm going to mute everyone here. They can have a specific function in our body because certain genes are pushed in the heart cells that transform them into heart cells. And certain genes then are pushed also that transform them into a brain cell or whatever cell they happen to be around, these messages that are being passed back and forth. So the expression or the activation of these applications inside of our cells can be affected by many different types of things in our environment. From the thoughts that we're thinking to the physical activity that we have, these genes are turning off and on all the time and regulating a great deal of activity. I mean, and that's very interesting. It has given birth to a whole study of genetics called epigenetics. Epigenetics means things beyond the genes, things that push the buttons that control the genes, the messengers that control the genes. And we ask ourselves the questions, what are they? What's their significance to our health? And how then do we actually map out exactly which genes are pushed? And so as we have been mapping out the human genome, we've also been developing technology to be able to see through our blood sampling, through blood samples, which genes have been pushed and expressed inside of our cells. The ASEA study that was done then over this 2-year period of time started out as an idea. The idea was, in order to understand how ASEA works inside our body, why don't we look at all of the genes? And we now have little gene chips that are able to look at the expressions of tens of thousands of genes at a time from just one blood sample. And the expression of these genes. Well, let's look at them and see what is happening in these genes. And thank heavens, over the period of time and as genetics has evolved, we're starting to understand which gene and press which buttons, which buttons are press which genes, and how these genes then interact and send messages to the whole system. This is very important information that has been built up. You can imagine the complexity, because there are 30,000 buttons out there, and the complexity of which are pressed, which buttons are not. So the Affymetrix people have developed one of these little chips that can monitor which genes have been pressed. Now we have to understand that the expression of genes in each person is a little bit different. You also have to understand that when people are going about their daily lives, eating, drinking, having a good day, having bad days, their genetic expressions are varying. So it becomes fairly complex in order to understand, well, which genes have been expressed differentially or when somebody is taking ASEA and which have not. And we have to have what they call statistic significance. So if we were to do an Affymetrix panel, which we did, we would have to run a great deal of statistics to see which of those genes then were preferentially expressed more than other genes inside of our body due to the random variations that happen all day long in all of us. So you can imagine the complexity of such type of analysis. And often in these gene studies, you won't get very much variation between people when you have different subs.
Nada.
So we're very lucky often to be able to tell the difference. Now, ASEA did this with the Affymetrix panel. They took a groups of 60 people, and they broke them into 3 types of groups. One was the control group. The control group just drank over the 8-week period of time. They just drank salt water. The group, the ASEA group, took the study group took the ASEA for this 8-week period of time, and then there was another group which was also a bit there, which took nothing. They didn't change anything at all. In order to be able to show statistical significance in a change in the genes, the people in the ASEA group would have to consistently show that certain genes were expressed more often than the genes in the other 2 groups, the people in the other 2 groups. And this was done, and the significance was established very high in some cases, and in some genes that certain genes, when you drink ASEA, do become expressed much more frequently than the genes of the people that have not taken ASEA. And this is a very important result. And the question then that we can ask, well, what genes are they, and what does it mean? What does it mean to us? Well, the interesting part of this is that they were able to establish 5 genes that have statistical significance. This is actually a blessing. It's actually wonderful, because those 5 genes now have specific roles inside of our bodies. If we were to identify more than 5 genes, let's say 20 or 50 or 60, as we did in the metabolomic study a little while ago, it would be more difficult to specify exactly what ASEA is doing genetically inside the body. But in this case, it was very clear. What ASEA is doing is expressing the genes that help to facilitate communication inside of our cells. These are the most important genes that we have. We're starting to recognize how important these things are now in the modern world, because we have computers that are networked together, that are able to communicate with one another via, let's say, Wi-Fi or Ethernet cables or such. And we have networks of computers, the same type of things that are like networks of our cells inside of our body. What happens when the communication systems of our computers shut down? The Wi-Fi shuts down, the internet shuts off. It significantly degrades then the integrity of our system, especially if if you have a system of connected computers equal to the system of connected cells in our body that have specific things that they need to do in order to keep the body healthy and alive, such as those cells which detect damage in our body, or let's say the immune cells that help defend our body. These cells need to have the communication systems up and running. The blood vessels that regulate the blood pressure inside of our body, and the digestive system that needs to communicate. When these communication channels are down, our body can suffer significant problems. In fact, what we've said all along is the redox signaling molecules inside of our cells help the cells to detect the damage, repair the damage, and replace the damage. And they send the signals necessary to the cells to do so, the surrounding cells. And we've known that they're effective in the immune system, that they're effective in the vascular system, and in the hormonal system also. We've known that through our observation studies. Before, we also know that they help protect our body. Remember the LDL cholesterol, the oxidized LDL cholesterol. It lowers the oxidation level of the cholesterol, which it helps our cardiovascular system. It also lowers oxidation levels in our body. It lowers the oxidative stress level. We've known that all along. We haven't understood why this does that. And now the specific genes that were identified in the Tourette study are giving us a picture and a window to not only verify that these things are valid, but also to give us an understanding of why the ASEA product is doing what it does, that we have observed inside of our body. So there are 5 genes, as I mentioned, that significantly shifted in the ASEA group. This is very important. These are the very genes that help us to do 5 areas of functionality. And this has been mentioned before, but I'll mention it to you again. In the immune system, in the innate immune system, when we have damage, it builds up oxidation in our cells. That oxidation sets off certain genes that identify and help to help the cells to recognize or detect that the cell has been invaded. Now, this innate immune system is very important because it's the first response that the body has in order to be able to combat the bacteria that is in our body. The genes that are pressed, by the way, by this innate immune system when a cell are very important. They're the communication genes that help the rest of the immune system work. Are specifically affected by one of the genes here, the ERG1 gene that helps the system. It connects the systems together and helps to do the response that we see. Well, that's one of the genes that has been identified in the ASEA product. So we can say that ASEA helps the innate immune system to detect pathogens, to detect problems that may have happened when our cells have been damaged or attacked. And then also it helps to facilitate the response of the immune system as this goes forward. There are other signaling sessions that happen, or signaling processes, that happened inside of our vascular system. I mean, this is absolutely very fascinating. When we have inside of our blood vessels problems like an increase in blood pressure from our heart or such, the blood vessels actually detect the increase of blood pressure and then dilate, they shrink, and have to have good elasticity in order to stretch and to adjust to the blood pressure that our body has. So as we start to exercise, for example, our blood pressure goes up, and our veins then have to be able to adjust themselves throughout our whole body. This is also a redox signaling process. It's one of the first ones that actually we identified, and it's very, very interesting that also the genes that we've identified in the study are those that help to maintain the elasticity and the response of the inner lining of the blood vessels in order to be able to keep our vascular tone and vascular elasticity during different changes in blood pressure and changes in oxygen levels, etc. All of those are regulated through also these stress levels, these reactive oxygen species, the same types of chemicals that are inside ASEA, that are produced by the linings of the blood vessels. Our hormones also in our brain also respond due to the oxidative stress levels inside of our cells. Oxidative stress levels excite the genes. The genes then are able to make the system adjust in order to be able to do what it should. The adjustments often mean that the cells have to produce hormones. Let me give an example. For example, if we have elevated sugar inside of our body, there are certain pancreatic cells that become stressed. They're called beta cells. They become stressed because they are burning, their mitochondria are burning much, much brighter because of the high sugar levels inside of our blood than normal. And because of this oxidative stress level, they push the buttons, the genetic buttons, to produce insulin. They express the insulin hormone. The insulin hormone then goes throughout our body and is received by other cells, and it instructs other cells to burn the sugars or to store the sugars away as fats, to burn and store them as fat. So you see, that's also an oxidative process that is control of the redox signaling process. And again, the genes that allow the body to respond to oxidative stress and hormonal production are also those which are affected by the ASEA product, by the redox signaling molecules in ASEA. Inflammatory pathways also. The oxidative stress production itself creates inflammatory cytokines and such that spread out and inflame the tissues. ASEA actually reduces inflammation in these areas where the tissues have been inflamed. The reduction of inflammation is shown by the reduction of the expression of the gene. The gene expression goes down. It does not express as much of the inflammatory response as people who don't take ASEA. Helps to reduce inflammation. Now we have proof that, or at least we have an idea, or we understand that it's possible that ASEA can do this, can reduce inflammation inside of our tissues that have been stressed. Now, the new thing that we started to realize through this study, the new thing that for me is kind of exciting because it's something that I actually did not anticipate. All of the other things were standard redox signaling pathways that we knew had been excited by ASEA, and now we have genetic proof that shows that they indeed are on a genetic level being expressed. There is one that I didn't know of, and that was the production of digestive enzymes and the signaling enzymes that are in the digestive system. And we've seen the effects of this. You know, people take ASEA for their stomach problems all the time, or when they have distress in the stomach, whatever I do at least, and get quite a bit of relief, and I never knew why. And we also found that it helps to both acidify and put more alkalinity in certain types of tissues in the body, and we've seen that in other studies that scientists have done. And never known quite why, and now we understand a little bit more that the one of the specific pathways of ASEA is to help to regulate the correct digestive enzymes in the digestive system. So Isn't that interesting, and isn't it wonderful that after going through these 2 years of studies, we've identified exactly those genes that we've seen both clinically in our past studies and also observationally in thousands and hundreds of thousands of people now that are taking ASEA worldwide, are affecting the exact same systems that help to reduce inflammation, to help the immune system to become much more effective, to help increase the integrity and elasticity of our vascular system, to help the inflammatory pathways, as we mentioned before, and the hormonal that is also expressed when we have certain stresses inside of our body to become normalized or more effective, as well as the digestive enzymes. All of these things now make sense. And so thank heavens, for the first time now, I can actually kind of breathe easy. And we have verifiable science that we can now hang our hat on something that says these genes are the ones that are expressed. These are the communication genes that are inside our body. These are the genes that keep the routers running, to keep the Wi-Fi up, to keep the communication pathways running, especially in the immune system and in our hormonal systems. These are the genes that are probably the most important genes that we have in our body because they regulate the communication pathways. They regulate the signaling pathways. So now we can say without equivocation that ASEA REDOX is a signaling supplement, proven scientifically to activate the genes that cause these signaling pathways in our body to be activated as we've expressed them before. And so I've seen my little brainchild, the redox signaling, grow up. And we've seen it verified. We've seen it bless the lives of thousands of people across the world. And it is a beautiful sight to see. And I'm grateful to each one of you that are here tonight with us. And I'm sorry that some of us were not able to get on. I'm grateful to you too also for understanding the importance of this new technology and putting your efforts into getting it out to the people that can benefit thereby. Thank you very much. I hope you're still with me, Maria.
Certainly, I'm Dr. Samuelson. Thank you so very much. What a wonderful lot of information you've given us, all brand new research. And I think, as you said, we can now hold our head high and just say we've got something amazing to share with everybody. And of course, we'll owe it to yourself. So thank you so very much. Now, we would like to open the lines to have questioning. There are about 300 people on the call. So if we can just do this fairly orderly, if there are questions that you think require a little bit more in depth, perhaps you can put them in the chat box, and then perhaps maybe if we don't get to you, Dr. Samuelson can then get back to you through your upline at some point. So if we can just do it in an orderly manner, Dr. Samuelson is the driver, so he will do his very best to answer all the questions. And just as a reminder, can we please make sure that the questions are compliant with the ASEA policies and regulations, and also just the note that ASEA is not a cure and does not say to cure any disease or condition in the body. It merely, as Doctor said, allows the communication between the cells and the immune system for our bodies to heal themselves. So, okay, we'll just let you go. We've got about 20 minutes or so of questions. So first in, first served, just nice and orderly, please. There's a lot of people for Dr. Samuelson. Over to you, Doctor.
Okay, very well. We have about 300 people here, so probably the best way to do this is to, if you can, raise